taking the time to join us today in the WICRI Realizing Healthier Pregnancy Clusters. This session will be recorded and will be available to individuals on our website. We will also send out the link through the cluster for those of you that are interested. And I will be in the session if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. But otherwise, I'm handing this over to Elliot to please moderate for us.
Hi, thank you, Michelle. Namegosibiing. We're pleased to welcome you to the Realizing Healthier Pregnancies Research Cluster. Thank you for joining us today. We want to start this off in a bit of a different way today. Instead of doing a land acknowledgement, I'm going to be placing myself instead. In placing myself or sharing my positionality, I'm inviting you to learn more about myself, where I come from, and where I'm currently positioned, where I'm coming from you today. In planning this event, actually, Michelle, Karen, and I had a thoughtful discussion about land acknowledgements, what they mean, and how they fall short of action and accountability. And ultimately, through this process, through kind of reflexivity and thinking about what land acknowledgements mean, we found that there's a lot of area for improvement and a lot of areas for growth of what it means for us to acknowledge the land, but also to think about what does it mean to acknowledge the action and the accountability that needs to be done to move towards reconciliation and just to move towards bettering the well-being of Indigenous people within Canada. And so in lieu of the land acknowledgements, I'm going to place myself and introduce myself and start this presentation off in a good way. And so again, Danse, Elliot Young, Nasikasun, Utsiniak, Niaskuyak, Notawi, Utsiniak, Niaskuyak, Egwa, Nekawi, Utsiniak from Sutana Nation. And so, sorry, I just introduced myself very briefly within Korean, kind of butchered it. And you may see a participant on here, Denise Young, who is actually my sister. And I love that she's on here. So it's very, very relational today. And what I did was actually just introduce myself in Cree. I shared where I'm from, which is Nesqueak, which is Ermiscan Cree Nation. It's one of the 4 nations that make up Musqueam. It's located about an hour south of Edmonton. We have family. My sister and I have family from 2 of the other First Nations within Musqueam, Samson Cree Nation and Louis Bull tribe. My dad is from, well, I should say, our dad is from Ermiscan Cree Nation. Our mom is actually from Sutana Nation, which is located down south, right beside Calgary. She's a Starlight, so we're related to a lot of the Starlight family. We're also related to some families up in the northeast area of Alberta, because my great kokom Emma Mind, who's Emma Memnuk, is related to is from that area, and so we have a lot of distant relatives from northeast Alberta. And so I'm currently living in Amiskwitsi-Wet'suwet'en, which is Edmonton, with my wife and 2 children. And I'm a PhD student with Stephanie Montesanti, who's on the call as well, in the School of Public Health at the University of Alberta. And I'm pleased to serve as the session moderator for our presentation today. And on behalf of WICRI, thank you for the time to attend this session. And so, hi, thank you for indulging me in a different way of welcoming you within this space in lieu of a land acknowledgement. And okay, so now onto the session. I want to start off by thanking WICRI's funders, the Stollery Children's Hospital Foundation and the Alberta Women's Health Foundation for making this research cluster possible. Oh, and those for you that just came in, we're sharing where we're from within the chat. So if you want to just quickly share where you're coming from today, so that way people kind of know where everybody's from. Wickery is actively seeking to build this research cluster. Please reach out to Wickery to join the cluster, nominate your collaborators or networks. Wickery's email is in the chat. And Michelle, I was meaning to ask you how to say your last name. Is it Bellew?
Close enough, Elliot. Thank you.
She'll be staying on the session to answer any questions you may have about participating in the research cluster. This session will be recorded and posted to the Wickery website. Wickery will send out the link to the recording. Please allow 24 hours to access the session recording. We are looking forward to sharing Karen's research with you and encourage questions after the presentation. And so now on to the reason why we're all here. I want to introduce Dr. Karen Lawford. Karen Lawford is an Anishaabeg midwife. I'm so sorry, Karen, I'm going to probably butcher a lot of the words that are here in the names, and I apologize. Namegosibiing, Seul First Nation, Treaty 3, and a registered midwife in Ontario. Karen seeks to identify the barriers to achieving equitable health services for Indigenous peoples. She was the 2020 Inspired Laureate in Health for her research and policy work on mandatory evacuation for birth. Her research interests also include maternity care on reserves, medical evacuation, midwifery, Indigenous feminist theories and methodologies, Indigenous women two-spirit leadership, Indigenous health and wellness, and healthcare. She is an associate professor in the Department of Obstetrics, sorry, butchering that one as well, gynecology at McMaster University, and holds an adjunct research professor position with the School of Indigenous and Canadian Studies at Carleton University. I'm going to pass it off to Karen to take it from here.
Awesome. So I have a monitor here with my camera. I also have a monitor to my left. I'm freezing a bit, David. So I'm going to do a share screen and get things sorted up. Okay, I'm gonna move you over here and let me make sure the chat is open so that if you have questions, you can ask me those. So, I have to sort things out so I can see you. And this is not the way I wanted to go, so I'm going to stop sharing. Sorry, I'm going to share a portion. Oh, there we go. Okay. This is going to work. There we go. That way you just see the slide that I'm working on. So I have the chat open again. Feel free to message me, DM me. Everyone can see. When my face is frozen, you can still hear me, right? Cool beans. Let's do this. Alrighty. And I have an hour in total. Okay, awesome. Thank you. So good. Hi. So today I'm going to talk about mapping comprehensive gender inclusive health and care in Ontario. So a little bit about me. I have a little curious cat here. I have found that people are often interested. Who are you, Karen? Who am I? The question. So I am an associate professor at McMaster, and I'm a research professor, a very special, thankful position I'm in. So I do a lot of research. I probably am most known for my research related to evacuation for birth, the policy work related to that, and then interviewing and meeting with people in Manitoba as well as now Ontario to let us know what is evacuation for pregnancy, for labor and birth, what's that like, and and learning more details, because right now, and before I started doing this research, there wasn't really anything written about it. People would tell me there wasn't a policy, it's just the way things are done. And that had me thinking and wondering. So that's the beginning there. I do hold a few adjunct status positions, and that's to help students really. So if they need a supervisor, I can be of assistance to them. I've been registered as a midwife since 2006. I do not clinically practice anymore. I do remain registered. I do have a PhD from Ottawa U from the Institute of Feminist and Gender Studies, as well as a master's and as my master's there. So I'm switching around again. There we go. I have my Bachelor of Health Science from McMaster, which is my midwifery training, and a Honors Bachelor of Science with a double major in chemistry and environmental science. So here's some pictures about water. These are some of the favorite things in the world for me. On the left, you'll see a picture of my kukum, and she's teaching me how to fillet a red sucker fish for smoking. Now, in this story of filleting the fish is not just preparing the fish or gutting it and cleaning it, but also how to prepare it so it can hang properly in the smoker, but also how to eat it, because it is a very fatty fish. And if you eat too much of it, you get sick, even though it's very, very good. So there's a bunch of teachings going on here, and we're talking and, just having the best time. And the picture on the right is part of a canoe journey that I've been part of a few times, where we take big, big canoes on the Sunshine Coast or west coast of Canada and paddle with different communities, exploring, I guess, revisiting spaces that are customary to ways of lives of the various First Nations around here. So I'm in this water. And actually, if you look quite close in the right-hand corner of that water picture, we're in the Pacific Ocean, but my colleague here, my friend Nicole, and I are desperately trying to turn into mermaids. It has yet to work. We're going to continue our practice, though, of being in water. And then the picture on the right-hand side is standing on probably about 8 feet of water by Prince Albert. It is so cold there in the winter. If anyone's been there, let me know. But it was beautiful. And when the sky is that clear and the ice that smooth, if there's any wind, it is so cold. We did not catch anything, but it was great fun just sitting there watching the sunset. I love water so much. So this is where my family is from. I hope you can see it and it's not too washed out. It's Namegosibiing is the Anishaabeg word for it. And the government of Canada put my family in Seul First Nation, which is just by Seul. So if you were to drive from Winnipeg on Highway 1, it turns into the 17, and you would go probably to Dryden and then drive up to Seul, just past Dryden. But really, my family has a lot of family, extended family, like my great-grandmother, my Kitchenukum in Pikangikum. So, and this is a little bit important because there's a lot of Anishinaabe in Ontario. But if you look at our water actually flows west. It flows into Lake Winnipeg, and that water flows north into Hudson Bay. So our people would have had relations and relationships with people heading west and north, whereas my friends, where I live in Nipissing, their water flows south. So into the Great Lakes and down into the Gulf of Mexico. And so it's really interesting to study family relations via water instead of through like just cousins and auntie stuff. How would have our people traveled? And my people traveled north. My name, my English name, my name, my Anishinaabe name in English is Winterfire. And this name is actually really, really great for me because winter, has anyone here been in a fire, and not in the fire, but around a fire in the winter time? There's snow, or maybe it's very cold and you're like, ooh, this is so nice. I'm just looking in the chat now for a response. Awesome. I see one person. Oh yes, there we go. So you know that if you go too close, love that. Thank you, Leanne, exactly. Being the fire is the best in the winter. But if you get too close, you'll get a burn. So you have to be careful how you manage yourself around that fire. And you also have to manage the fire because you don't want it too big, but you want it still burning. And for those Kylie who has a big burn, you're probably well aware of this. You want it good and hot so you can burn stuff, but not too hot that it's out of control, but also that you are watching it so it doesn't burn out. So if you know me, this is a good name because I have to be careful. I have to be careful not to hurt people with my words. I also have to be careful to protect myself and keep myself safe and healthy and well so that I don't burn out or out of control. So I think that's a good name for me, and I love this picture so much. So some of the things that I talk about today, I have very strong feelings about, just because there's a lot of harm that has been done to Indigenous peoples and by settlers through the advancement of Canada as a nation state, through Christianity, as we're coming up to September 30th. So it's hard for me. And so I feel vulnerable sharing this level of myself to you. I do want you to know that my intentions are about sharing knowledge and having, not nice, that's not the right word, having questions of curiosity, discussions of curiosity, so that we can understand how to work together in a way that feels good for us while also doing the things we want to accomplish. So in this picture is a waterfall, which is sometimes I feel like this, like just a lot of energy just cascading down. And I'm coming into that place where then the water starts to settle and becomes less moving, and more gentle. And so these strong feelings, though, I'm still working with them. I don't want to ever remove the harms and the significance of things like Indian residential schools, which were largely run by Catholic and Anglican churches. But how to navigate that space while feeling this is something I'm still working with. Because Canada was built on colonialism, white supremacy, misogyny, patriarchy, Christianity, systemic injustice, and oppression. Indigenous peoples were at the wishes of the initial colonizers and settlers. We wouldn't actually be here. So we're here as Indigenous peoples on these lands still, despite the things on this slide. And I recognize that it might be hard for people who are Christian to see some of these words, but how do we still talk about this where people can find comfort and spiritual comfort and life guidance in Christianity, while also seeing the harms, recognize the documented harms that have been done in the name of Christianity and by Christians. And this is a very particular geopolitical state that these things are apparent. This wouldn't be the same possibly for other countries in the world, but it is for Canada. And I'm happy if there's any questions or comments you have throughout my presentation, just pop them in the chat, maybe as a DM if you're more comfortable, to just maybe ask me a question or a wonder or you're curious. So on the previous slide, those statements, I mean, they're fairly strong, but how do I know this to be true? So in addition to the abundant literature and testimony from Indigenous peoples and people who were in fact part of those systems, such as nuns, teachers, priests, we can look to the Royal Commission from 1996, which I find hard to believe. I think that's 30 years ago. Are we coming up to the 30th anniversary? Time is so strange. It's like it stopped being real with COVID. I think that's almost 30. Then we have the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada from 2015. We're coming up to 10 years. And then we have the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls from 5 years ago. So things are still coming to light, that we know there's more details and I guess some strategies of colonialism that need to be understood. So when I was a midwife, a registered midwife, and I started midwifery school, I was very excited. Like, I still remember thinking, so I was pregnant with my son after my first degree, and I had midwifery care. And I thought, this is so great. They're treating me like, the midwives were treating me like I was someone who could understand. I was engaged in my healthcare. I had some options to choose from. I had some decisions to make, and I had time. And I was really excited by that. So often with science students, like, what are you going to do next? Oh, apply to medicine. But then I thought, I'll apply to midwifery once. And if I get in, that's a sign. I don't know what the sign was, but I just trusted in this, maybe probably a bit naively. And I did get accepted into midwifery. So I thought, this is great. I can become a midwife and work on reserve, work with my people to bring midwifery back, but also to bring the dignity of health and care. That's really a core component of midwifery services, whether it's registered or Indigenous midwifery services. But almost in my first year of studies, I learned that there's this thing called jurisdiction, and I will have a slide on this. In fact, that actually prevented me from working on reserves. And to say that it was heartbreaking is really true. Like, I still think about it, and I think, my dreams were crushed, and by something that is manufactured, that is not real. Trees are real. The geopolitical borders that separate Alberta from Saskatchewan, or from Canada from the US, those are imaginary lines that are made real by, let's say, military, or by our agreement that when I go to, where was I? I went from Winnipeg to Fort Frances, and I went through the states. Well, that imaginary line, though, was made real by having to go through a border crossing. So we decided we're going to realize this imaginary border. And that's something I didn't understand, because I thought, I have a skill set, there's a need, we need to have people who can skilled and trained to deliver babies with my people just over there, and I couldn't do it. So when I look at this country, I have a map of Canada here, which is actually available for us to view, able for us to be viewed, because of the lines. It's not, let's say, the Kingdom of Denmark, which is Greenland, and it's not a lot, like, it's not the States. We know we're Canada because of these lines, and we know that I'm going to choose, who am I going to choose? A lot of Alberta folks. So I'll choose Alberta. You know that your healthcare is in Alberta, and that if for whatever reason, and this is probably not common, so Alberta is a hard one to choose. I'm going to go back, sorry, to Ontario, because Ontario, if something happens, where do people go? Let's say the hospital's full. Where are people transported? I'll just look in the chat. Oh, they actually go to Winnipeg. That's a great idea, though. Quebec. Generally, Ontario people are transported south, almost like the longitudinal lines, like they just follow, except they go to Manitoba. So you're probably aware of this in Alberta, because if something happens in Calgary, you're probably sent up to Edmonton, is my guess. Okay, see this. Okay, so curious. The interesting thing about Winnipeg is if they have a really long wait list for knee surgeries. Yeah, thank you, Esther, for that comment in the chat. So where do they send people in Winnipeg for knee surgeries if they need it sooner than later? They send them to the States. So we have care agreements between different cities in the same province. We have care agreements that will facilitate basically an exchange of money between provinces, and we obviously have care agreements between different provinces and another country. And yet I can't work on a reserve, or at the time, just over there that I could literally see. So this tells you the power of jurisdiction, not just as a geopolitical entity, but as a policy decision. We don't do this because of jurisdiction. And when people say this to me, what I've found is the discussion is over. They've implemented the word that ends the conversation. So when we think, oh, I have one more question about this Canada map. When we look at the map of Canada, we see in some people's eyes a healthcare system. It's governed by the Canada Health Act. So we have 10 provinces and 3 territories, except the Canada Health Act does not apply to the territories. In fact, the territories, in terms of how their healthcare, their authority to provide healthcare, is from a delegated act from the federal government, because it's only the provinces that are mentioned in our constitution. So then we think, okay, then there's maybe 13 healthcare systems because there's 13 provinces and territories. Well, then what about the federal healthcare system that overlays this, that provides healthcare for military, like active military, RCMP, federal inmates? We don't see that invisible healthcare system. We also don't see the healthcare systems that are unique perhaps to each First Nation or tribal council. And this is the slide that shows, and it is very hard to find a map. I'm going to keep looking, because this is all the First Nations and tribal councils in Canada. So if each one of these First Nations and tribal councils has their own contribution agreement or transfer agreement with the federal government, how many healthcare systems then do we have in Canada, and how do we monitor that? So BC is a bit different. Of course, there's the First Nations Health Agreement, which is all the first, and I don't think it's all the First Nations, but most of the First Nations in BC has an agreement, a tripartite agreement with the province of BC, the government of Canada, and then as kind of a conglomerate of First Nations negotiating together for services and basically transfer funding. The First Nations, the tripartite agreement does not apply to those off reserve. It does not apply to Inuit or Métis. So there's still not a cohesive agreement even in BC itself. My dog's in the background making sounds that are comfortable. He's very comfortable on the bed, if you can hear it. I don't. So what I study then is evacuation for birth. This is a federal health policy prior to FNIB and NIHB being part of ISC. They were part of Health Canada, so it was a federal Health Canada policy. And what it did was it forced and enforced pregnant Indigenous peoples, mainly First Nations and Inuit, to travel south to give, or travel outside their community, usually south along the American border, to give birth, wait and give birth. So between 36 and 38 weeks, a federally employed nurse will come and, well, they'll make arrangements. Someone magically will make arrangements so that they can travel south. Again, midwives not able to work within these nursing stations. Of course, some midwives working on reserve now as Indigenous midwifery practices, but still cannot engage with that federal policy. The argumentation from the government of Canada being that midwives are not listed in the Treasury Board as employable. So saying, well, we can't do it, and we can't do it. So that was sarcasm. But what we're seeing as a result of transferring people south from their communities, and again, largely it is to quite southern communities, urban centers, often tertiary care centers, is that in addition to this, then we're seeing that the number of family physicians practicing obstetrics in all settings outside of urban, in fact, all settings in general, not delivering babies. So what that means, I'm going to go back to my Canada map here, is that that we're seeing more and more people having to travel for labor and birth. So around, where's Hay River, Fort Smith, around here, just north of Alberta there, the line, a few years ago, they preemptively closed their labor and delivery unit for like 3 months. Over Christmas, everybody had to travel to Edmonton to give birth. There was no financial support, no care for their children. They had to either go live in a hotel for 2 months or 3 months, like for Indigenous people had to travel for birth, or they brought their whole family down. So that really brought to light, and that was during sorry, I'm losing track of time again. Either it was during the COVID or just after. So someone there, I wish, who is this? Tanya knows all about this. I love this. Thank you, Tanya. Sorry, I can only see a few people, so I just noticing that you're nodding. Thank you. So we are seeing this, and when we've had something called a maternity care crisis for like 20 years, and yet we still not just centralize, but we southernize maternity care services. I mean, Edmonton, I don't know, is Edmonton considered north in Alberta? You do? Okay. It's like in Ontario, people say Barrie is north. I'm like, Barrie is like an hour from Toronto. They're like, oh, we're going north. I'm like, no, you're not. So I mean, there's a context there, but everyone having to travel to, large centers to give birth, how is that helping anyone? How is that involving partners? How is it building family cohesiveness? How, like, are we just destroying people's lives? Somebody told me, I was just in Fort Francis last week, and there was a white woman, a non-Indigenous woman, and she was our note taker. She was awesome. And she told me that she lives in the Fort Francis area, and she was told, so Fort Francis, if you were to look at Thunder Bay on this map, just picture it sort of in between Thunder Bay and the Manitoba border. She was told to go to Thunder Bay, to Winnipeg, because she had to be delivered immediately. She was 32 weeks. So she went there, drove there. It's a 5-hour drive. And then she got there, and there was a shift change. And the new person, the new OB on call, said, no, we're not going to keep you. Go home. So she went home. When she did go back and have her baby, she had an extremely traumatic birth. I don't understand. I didn't actually ask the details, because it is also traumatizing for me to hear these. I know there's a context to it. She actually checked herself and her baby out of the hospital against medical wishes, and signed that paper to go back home and had care and community. But 6 weeks after the baby was born, as a family, they decided that her husband would have a vasectomy, because he couldn't see her be traumatized that much ever again. This is real life. So is that a coerced sterilization? Like, what would we say if that person was not white and they were Black, or they were Indigenous? Would we say that was a coercive situation where they knew they couldn't get the healthcare in a respectful, dignified manner, that it was harmful when it was provided, and so we'd rather not go through that again, so we'd be sterilized? I don't know the answer. I wonder about these things, because are people making informed decision making, but what is the context of that decision making? So I wrote a paper, because someone later on did tell me that, so I graduated in 2017. Yeah, this was part of it. I remember I was doing my research in Manitoba, and I was trying to meet with anyone who would talk to me, tell me about evacuation. How does the system work here in Manitoba? And I got a phone call at my house. I was living in Ottawa at the time, by one of the head nurses for the government of Canada, telling me to stop my research, that what I was doing wasn't real. I was embarrassing myself and ruining my career. So she had that phone call with me for about a half an hour. So after that call, I was really scared, because I thought, what am I like? I'm open to being wrong, but I'm like, this is so bizarre. And this is somebody of great authority over me as a student, and have great influence over my research. So turns out Paul Chartrand is on my PhD committee. Now, who's Paul Chartrand? Probably the most famous Métis lawyer in Canada, responsible for parts of Section 35 of the Constitution Act. So I phoned him. I said, is this true? He said, no, not at all. And then more conversation. So what happened from that, though, was I wrote a paper, and actually developed a policy tool so that we could say, if there were these 3 components, it's evidence-based. I've actually won an award for this paper. Is there a policy? A policy generally is what governments decide. It's also what governments decide not to do. So you've probably heard this in the negative. It's not our policy to do that. It's okay to ask for, show me the policy then, because what are the parameters of your policy? So if you have material impacts, There's an allocation of resources, usually money, and there's a reaction to something. You have a policy. And policies are so fantastic because there's a bit of flexibility. They can be more pliable than, say, legislation or regulations or the Constitution. So policy is sometimes a workaround to work within that framework, but still do a little something extra. So if you, let's say you have a regulation that says we can only deal with numbers 1 to 100, you can develop a policy to say, well, we're going to work with numbers 1.9. Technically, that's between 1 and 100. We're just going to give it a bit more nuance to suit our needs as government officials. And I think that's reasonable. So yes, the evacuation policy is real. And based on my research, this is what it looks like. It is very hard to see on my end. I'm just going to describe it quick and then I'll zoom in so you can see it. People are pregnant, they enter their healthcare system on reserve. They then enter the federal healthcare system, provincial healthcare systems, even municipal healthcare systems. And this is how they move about in Manitoba. So what I'll do is I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna make it bigger. Bigger. And I'm actually gonna move around the slide. Doesn't really matter, does it? So the person is pregnant, they continue their pregnancy. Oh, I'll even make that bigger. They either see a nurse or a GP at the nursing station. Sometimes they go to like provincially employed physicians. Like let's say there's a small town or a city outside the reserve, they'll just go over there. Interesting is that abortions are very difficult to gain access to. So then they're pregnant. I've had this, anything with a diamond means that there's nothing. So there's no midwifery care in this system at all, as well as no prenatal education once they're evacuated. So then they're evacuated 36 to 38 weeks. I'll make that even bigger. And they take a plane, bus, boat, helicopter, taxi, personal vehicle, or snow machine. Like it depends how the ice is. Sometimes there's helicopters that literally just take people from their community across the ice, like a river. And those are about $10,000 each. I asked, fascinating, right? So then they go into lodging into a boarding home. So where they can either stay at a boarding home, some communities have a boarding home for people. There's hotels, probably know about hotels that are just mainly people who travel for healthcare. Sometimes they stay with family. They even stay at women's shelters. So then they're there, go into labor. Though sometimes they have prenatal care. That's really good. They'll have prenatal care with an OB, but they sometimes have no prenatal care. So between 36 and 38 weeks, they leave and they have no health care. So are they in labor? So the little dotted lines are the provincial healthcare system. So they go to the hospital, maybe they're in labor, maybe they're not. They just kind of continue the cycle. It's pretty familiar. Am I in labor or not? Again, without prenatal education at that later time, do they know? If they're in labor, they're admitted to the hospital and then they give birth. So there's 3 scenarios here, and maybe there's more. I couldn't think of them. And I'll make this even bigger now so that you can really see, is that if there's a well person and baby, both are discharged together. The hospitals are very careful about and really want to keep people together. What happens though if the person who's pregnant is not discharged? Let's say postpartum, they're in the ICU for something, let's say hemorrhage, the most common one. What happens to that baby? Sometimes that baby is put in foster care. If you have a well baby, that baby might enter foster care. So if the baby's not discharged though, and the baby's in the NICU, but the person is pregnant, and in my research in this study, everyone was a woman who identified. So I'll say women, but it's only for this research. Everyone identified as a woman. The woman visits, breastfeeding, expressing milk to give that baby, staying with that baby as much as possible. There's not a lot of accommodations for people when their baby's in the NICU, especially if it's for a long time. And then after they're discharged home, when they get home, they're visited by the nurse 2 weeks postpartum. So they're home with a brand new baby, not having prenatal education outside of the community. They're not seeing a care provider for 2 weeks. If you're a midwife, you would see your care provider within 24 hours, 48 hours, 5 to 7 days, and 10 days, 10 to 14. You'd have 4 visits in the time of this. I talked to a federally employed nurse. She was Métis. And when that person flies in with that baby, she greets them at the plane. And guess what her breastfeeding success rate is for the community that she's documented? Put in a number in the chat. %100. 100. I couldn't believe it. I still feel like crying when I think about it. That nurse met them at the plane to help. So I don't think I can make my slide any different. So that's what it looks like in Manitoba. Doesn't mean it's absolutely right. It does mean, though, that it's the only documentation available of how the evacuation policy works in Manitoba. It probably works like this all over Canada. So what I found, though, is my approach to research, as you can probably guess, is to prove that something's real. I describe how it's harmful, and then I do a policy analysis, and then I offer some recommendations, and I repeat this. And I really think that my approach was, and when I do research, like, it's actually quite obvious. It's deficit based and is blameful. And I wrote it like that. It's full of blame. Like, we got to blame that person instead of like, and I just found this was very harmful to me, like, because I was really engaged constantly in how something wasn't working. And it was taxing on me. Remember that little waterfall from before? Emotionally draining, and it was morally injurious to me. Because what I found, and no surprise to you, I'm sure, is that there's an extreme disrespect of Indigenous people, Indigenous healers, knowledge keepers, and midwives by non-Indigenous healthcare providers. Healthcare providers have been and are extremely racist. There is no amount of cultural safety training that we can give to someone to stop them from being racist. I've asked. One of my students just did a PhD on this very topic and on healthcare providers' experiences of evacuation. And I asked her, after her research was done in her defense, is there anything we can do to help racist care providers be not racist? And she said no. I'm like, well, what do we do with that now? Because we can help people understand if there's a willingness, but if there's not a willingness, we cannot change this. Because of course, we're hearing about coercion, lies. If you don't do this, I'm going to take your baby. Threats. That's what happens. If you don't get sterilized, I'm going to take your baby. I'm going to put it in foster care, says the nurse, the physician, the social worker. They're going to take your baby because it happens. Torturing children, hearing about things I cannot repeat or talk about. And again, continuing the path of isolating and confining Indigenous peoples so as to civilize and assimilate us into a generic Canadian body politic. And this text right here, I'll highlight it, is actually text from an Indian agent who was writing this either just before Confederation or just after in the 1867. So I did talk a little bit about moral injury, how it was morally injurious for me to do that work, even though obviously quite successful. Like, this is the pattern, this is how you do it. So, but I think that there's enough evidence to show that aspect of research. And what I was wondering is, how can I keep researching and publishing on topics that are not congruent or aligned with my own morals, as well as my personal ethics? So as a registered midwife, I have to adhere to the Code of Ethics from the College of Ontario Midwives. So then I consider moral injury as a way to understand and what I was experiencing, as well as shifting into something, the possibilities of what could be. So what's moral injury? Moral injury is a spectrum. Are there any nurses here? If you could just add RN, because this nurses know a lot about this. Love nurses. Love this. Love this. Thank you for the hand raise, Esther and Leanne. So PTSD, this comes from research of PTSD from soldiers who were tasked to go into war and kill people, but then disobeying one of the 10 commandments, thou shalt not kill. Shauna, you have a question. Or are you raising your hand? Just an RN. That's not a sticker. It should be say RN proud to be or so. Yes, I know what you mean though. Love it. Thank you, Shauna. So PTSD predominantly, so moral injury is caused by a threat to one's morality. So the things that you hold dear and important to you, that's what moral injury is. So PTSD predominantly impacts a sense of safety. Moral injury predominantly impacts a sense of trust and or self-respect. And burnout impacts one's sense of engagement and efficacy. While these may co-occur and overlap, causes and effects are sufficiently different and require different interventions. So I think we know this to be true, even if we haven't heard the topic before. Okay, yeah, I should give that a little heart too. There we go. So what I found is that the exclusion of all genders and sexualities is morally injurious to me. And then I wonder, what does inclusive mean? So how can I claim to be someone who advocates for and researches and health and care for Indigenous peoples, but only examine women or those who can be pregnant? What about all of the additional health and care, I gotta delete that there, sorry, and care practices and services that sustain us. So when I think of like health and care or healthcare, people often think of, actually they think a lot of nurses, doctors, pharmaceuticals, and institutionalized like a care center or hospital. What if we thought about health and care separately? What if we thought about the clean water that we drink? What if we thought about going for a walk as part of our healthcare? That kind of grounds us, reminds us, keeps us mentally well. So I thought about this and I thought, how can it be actively inclusive? And I thought, is the word, trying to find words, right? Proactively inclusive, responsively, I just don't know. And then I landed upon desire-based health research. Now, English is a very interesting language. So I'm the first generation in my family to speak English as a first language. So I look at English a bit differently because I'm always like, what does this mean? How do you say this? What's the context? Because desire often is sexualized in our world. And that is not the only definition. And even concepts of intimacy are sexualized. But we do have, as researchers, an intimate relationship when we talk to someone. And I want to think about desire. Now, I'm going to see who's all here. Oh, Shauna. What are you going to have for supper tonight, Shauna? I'll just let you put it in the chat, or you can come on camera or unmute yourself, or you can just put in the chat, whatever is comfortable for you. What are you going to have for supper tonight? Ooh, okay, that sounds really good. If I could give you a magic wand and you could be anywhere or have any food you want, what would that desire be for supper tonight? Oh, I love this. I want to know more. Can you see the difference? And can you kind of vibe with the difference from those? And that is, to me, is what desire does. It allows someone to actually say what they want, however ridiculous it might sound. Popcorn for supper. Love it. Love it. I don't know. What do you think of that, Shauna? If you want to just type a little something or come on, take yourself up. Ah, love this. And look at your responses from just popcorn that's different from turkey sausage with cabbage, which I think love this so much. And this is something I like to have this, like, start this conversation, is it's not saying we can't have turkey sausage with cabbage for supper, but we can also sometimes have popcorn for supper. And that's what I love, this intimacy, Shauna, that you shared with us. Thank you so much. And that's what I love about desires, how we can shift into spaces of what could be. And that is very interesting to me. I feel like there's hope when we think about desire. And the hope in, I'd say, in the supper case is perhaps, just from this example today, is about shame, not having the shame for what we desire. And how we created as an online group the conditions. I'm not saying having popcorn is shameful, by the way, but to actually be able to say, we created the conditions in which one of our colleagues, whom some of us have never met, was comfortable sharing their desire. And that to me is the beautiful, affirming part of research that I want to engage with. So I do find hope in future and Indigenous birth workers, the spectrum of services, helpers, aunties, doulas, and midwives, preconception to death. And I think of, I'm gonna just pop into this little image. This is Sunny Asu, who is a very famous artist, I believe, who takes like colonial imagery and then overlays Indigenous artistry, his Indigenous artistry. And I'll just read this little text about hope. Armed with spirit and the teaching of our ancestors, all our relations behind us, we are living the Indigenous future. We are the descendants of a future imaginary that has already passed, the outcome of the intentions, resistance, and survivance of our ancestors. Simultaneously, in the future and the past, we are living the dystopian now. Beam me up, Scotty, is what I see. Get me out of this. And I think that's where desire can come in and can give us some hope. So this is my research team, Returning Care and Health Home. We have a website because we study comprehensive, gender inclusive, sexual and reproductive health and care for Indigenous peoples. And we study this as Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. And we have a few minutes left, and I have a QR code I want you to click on. Because I want to look at it, I want to show you our map. And if that doesn't, you know what I'll do? I'll also put, the website in the chat, if that's easier, because it might be, just to click on a link. And I'm also going to change what you're seeing. So hold on tight. This is what it looks like. So I have a research grant, CHR research grant to map health and care for Ontario. I'm going to make you bigger so I can see you all. There we go. And I'm going to have the chat still here. Is everyone able to open the map or see the screen that I have? Okay, yeah. If you don't, put a message in the chat. So I'm now going to shift to my other screen, and I'm having you on this screen. So this is, I'm going to show you some quick things. Let's say you're looking for abortion services and your partner, someone, your auntie, your cousin comes in, there's a quick exit to take you out. Let's see if it works. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. So in this, there's this little map, this little dot down here in the bottom left. You can close it. You can also make this bigger. So right now, this is showing all the First Nations, nursing stations, like that's the list of things on this map. You can unclick them and then just click First Nations. So if there's a circle, you'll just click on it. And what it will happen is, okay, you can see there's 2 First Nations right there. And it has a link on the right-hand side. I'm going to let's take that off and let's go to care type, mental health. Ooh, so on the left there, you can see the options. sorry, I'm just blank there on what those are. Of what you, let's unclick them and let's find non-maternity hospitals. Really? Let's find, I know there's only one. Oh, look at all this. Nurse practitioner led. Oh, you know why? It's because I have the First Nations on. Let's find the non-maternity hospitals in this country. So we're calling this, oh, but let's take off. Yeah. So I guess nursing stations are on here too. Non-maternity hospitals. We have Chapleau. What do we have here? Bingham and Timmins. Is there anything you want to look up? Let's do something else. Let's go to sexual health. Let's see what it has here. So this is an open access online digital atlas using cyber cartography. And it used layers of data that are open access. So anything online, none of this, we could obviously sell this to Google, but then Google owns everything and we have nothing. So this is meant for us. It runs on the, and I'll just make this a little bit bigger, the Nunali platform on the bottom right-hand side, which is run out of Carleton University at the GCRC, the Geomatics and Cartography Research Center. And let's see what we can here. Let's do this. Let's do tribal council nursing stations. Oh, there's, you know what? There is only one in the province. I forgot. It's right here. I think they have a, I don't quite understand, but they're very special, this tribal council. Let's see where we can get some STD BBI testing. And let's zoom that in, because what's going on? So we see there's, like, you can see where the services are, but also you can see where they're not. Of course, there'll be many down in Toronto. What's this one? Community Health Center, that's nice. Now, interesting thing here is there's actually a lot of services in this particular part of Ontario. But if you're from that part of Ontario, you knew that. Go in there, up in here, Bruce Peninsula. Isn't that it? So what else? Let's see where there's midwives. Do we have midwives? We should. We haven't put them in, we're waiting for permission from the Indigenous midwifery practices to see if we can add them. It is publicly available information, but we just want to double check because once it's on there, it is public. So we want to be careful with that. Let's see, let's take off, there's midwifery. Was there, there we go. Let's just do them. So right now we only have one on, and that's Kitaganing midwives. They've given us permission. That doesn't mean there's not more, we just don't know them. Here are all the midwifery practices in Ontario. Oh, out of Wabascat. Oh, that's with Christine Roy. Christine Roy is wonderful. Let's see, who do we have here? Sage Femme Temeskaming. There should be another one put on here soon. The one in Cochrane. There's airports. We're supposed to be able to click that. Or is that being sorted out still? So yeah, things to sort out. We just really started making this public a few maybe weeks ago. So there's things like, oh, the planes aren't on there. I actually don't know how to get the planes back on. Polar Bear Express is on there. Am I missing this? Go to home. So I'll bring this up with our team. We meet every Thursday. Where are the planes? How do you bring it back? So this is what we're doing. Oh, there's a nursing station out there. Yeah, Fort Severn. That's the northernmost reserve in Ontario. So happy to answer any questions. So what we're hoping to do is interview a bunch of focus groups with Indigenous peoples in Ontario and ask them what is the health and care that they desire and where do they want it. So we can say people want their health care somewhere. They want it, and maybe it's already where it's located, but I doubt it. So I'm happy to take any questions. I'm going to stop
Hey, hi,
sharing.
Karen.
If anyone wants me to keep sharing the map, it's just, if you're in it, you can click things yourself. So I did apply for a grant. I just submitted it actually on the 16th. Nope, that's not true. The 9th. Was it just the 9th? My calendar's over there. For a national research project funded to make a national map like this.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Karen. So yeah, if anybody has any questions about the map or overall Karen's presentation, yeah, feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat.
Yeah, happy to discuss, or any of the research I've done, or maybe things that you're studying on your end to, provide health and care for Indigenous people, whether it's related to sexual and reproductive health and care or not. Like it's really important. I don't know, like I never want people to think that this is like Karen's work. It's not my work. I need to go away and retire and someone else keep, hopefully not doing this, but building on it, because this is about how we can help each other to provide the care that we think that either we want to provide as care providers or that we think there's a gap. Yeah, no worries. Yeah. Just responding, Kylie had to leave. And you can just call me Karen. Unless, I mean, if I didn't like you, but I like you. I've never had anyone, I said, no, it's Dr. Karen. No, never. Oh, Stephanie, yes.
Hi, Karen. Thank you so much for your presentation. That was wonderful, and I learned so much. I was taking a lot of notes.
Awesome.
As you know, because we've chatted a lot over email, and we have Sheena's here, and there's
yes,
a lot of
yes.
work that we're doing up in Wood Buffalo in northern Alberta. So I was curious to know, so Sheena and another Indigenous midwife who I believe you had the pleasure of meeting in New Mexico, right, Sheena?
Yes.
Yeah, so they head up a community-led program called Aunties Within Reach. And if you're interested to know more, come back to this session on October 30th.
Oh, I felt that.
Sheena and I are going to chat a little bit more about that. But I guess my question is how have you engaged with community-led, community-derived programs like theirs that are really in the midst of responding and addressing to that forced evacuation policy and filling that gap around prenatal care when moms are evacuated from a remote community. So in the context of Wood Buffalo, that's Fort Chip, they're evacuated sometimes even earlier than 36 weeks to Fort McMurray. And, community-based programs like Aunties Within Reach are there meeting with moms and ensuring that they have that continuity of prenatal care. But you noted in your research that's a big gap, that sometimes that prenatal care is not there. And as someone who's been pregnant, that those last few weeks, you have a lot of medical appointments, right? And the frequency of it. And so that makes me worried in terms of not having that care and attention the last few weeks before birth, and how sometimes in those last few weeks being so critical, where there can be medical complications or health complications that may arise. So we're seeing a resurgence of these community-derived programs that are really at the forefront of responding to healthcare inequities and gaps. And I'm curious to know more about how while your work is really focused around the policies and the systems, thinking about that local action as a response to those gaps in the policies and the role that it plays. So curious to hear your reflections and comments on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So lots of what you just said in like 2 minutes is an entire presentation. And I do think, and let me just touch upon like the absent prenatal visits when people are evacuated. So yes, normally at that time of your pregnancy, you're seeing a primary care provider every week for just like probably the hugest one, the fetal heart sounds and blood pressure. That's probably, if I could distill it down bluntly to two things that probably need to be done. But then people are traveling and not getting any care at all. We're just like, what? So I find that shocking. And so I wonder here about community practice, because everyone I've met, and again, remember that people come to me, they're opting into this relationship. Doesn't mean that everyone's like this. They're working so hard to provide excellent clinical care. I met with an OB in Winnipeg, and literally it's between phone calls. And he also doesn't even bill for all his consults because he doesn't have time to. So people are really, help. What is going on here, though, that people cannot, there's not a system linkage to provide that care, but I don't understand why. Like, are people afraid? Is there really someone saying, well, don't go? Why don't they go? Do we need to bring care providers to people, to those hostels or places where people are at? I find there's just a lot. And in terms of people traveling for birth, yes, people are going to have to travel for birth. However, and can we have people in community who know how to deliver babies? Because even if we evacuated everybody out at 36 weeks, somebody's still going to have their baby in community just because it happens. But we know that, and yet we don't prepare people with a basic skill set to deliver babies. People can be evacuated and the OR is full. There's no beds, so we evacuate them somewhere else, or they just have their baby in the assessment area where things are not set up for birth. People have their babies in cars, and like, please, no cars, no ambulances. We need things set up for, resuscitation if needed. So I wonder about the rationale of centralizing and really tightly concentrating services instead of training outside. So I don't know a lot about Sheena's work other than a few things. I wonder, and that seems like it is a life purpose. I obviously don't want to speak with you, Sheena, but it's not something you're doing at the side of your desk because it pays you $10,000 a month. It's something that you're doing and that people do because it's meaningful and it's a commitment to an idea, a concept for a group of people. How can we support that in ways that actually then and it's not about replicating the same thing, but creating a context of care that is actually so that someone can be there to do that extra. It is extra work. So I always wonder too about sending all our kids off to university in southern locations. Why can't we train midwives in community? I just have so many questions about it. And those are health workforce questions. In terms of what I'm doing to provide, I don't provide clinical care. I'm not a clinician. So I don't know if I answered all your questions. But you're a researcher, your questions are never.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your thoughts. I think it gets me thinking a lot about the role of advocacy in changing or shifting policies, such as the forced evacuation that has had a lot of harmful impacts and consequences for moms and their families. But policies like that are also so entrenched within our historical, I guess, institutions. That, yeah, I just, how do we reverse those policies, right? And as you know, there's been a lot of advocacy around this policy in particular, and there are, outside of this example, there are situations where advocacy has had a positive change in shifting the tide. So I guess I think about the future too.
Yeah. So one of the things though about the work, like I've been doing this research work for over 20 years. I have not changed one single policy. The reason people are allowed to have a partner when they're evacuated is because there was a few families. This is what I heard. It is not anything to do with my research. Two families or a few families in Pikangikum said, I am not being evacuated unless you pay for my partner to come. And they wouldn't leave, and they wouldn't leave. And so the government of whoever was running the regional FNIB office said, fine, we'll pay for your partner. And that changed everything. It was nothing I did. And yes, I give information, but not one policy has changed because of my work. It is like talking into a void, a vacuum, where it has made no difference. These are, and the funny thing about that story is the minister at the time, what was her name? I'm just looking at my partner, Minister of Health, went to Queens.
Yeah. That'll come to me.
Me too. Do you remember her? What's her name? She announced at International Confederation of Midwives Conference, ICM in Toronto, that the government of Canada was now funding, like there was this big policy decision. And I'm like, funding partners. I'm like, Philpott, Jane Philpott.
Yeah.
And she said that this big announcement at ICM, yay, the federal government's finally going to fund a partner or one escort. Well, they had already been doing it for years. And it wasn't a decision that they led. It was a decision that was led by community. So my work, let's make this very clear, has made no difference. It is, I have hope, it is educational, and maybe there'll be some type of tipping point. Just looking at the chats really quick, but it is,
that was meant to be for everybody. Sorry.
oh, no, it's good. I love this. Thank you, Denise. I just don't, I want to make sure I'm following along, but it is really like the work needs to come from community. We can be supportive, but Sheena's community. We need to support Sheena. Well, I don't know, Denise, you're a nurse. We need to support Denise. I don't, we need to support people in community. Like I can do all of this like academic stuff and win a ton of awards and have like, has it made a difference? More people know, people are reading about it, and maybe eventually, but community needs to say, we need to bring birth home. We need to have escorts. We need to have a midwife in our community. Even if we're still evacuated, someone is going to have a baby unattended. We need a professional there. Maybe our midwife does all of the sexual and reproductive health care from preconception to death. But the scopes of practice are part of that story, but also community needs to say, we're not doing this anymore. And so Kihewan is doing that. We're not doing this anymore. And I am in full support. Whatever they need, I'm there. But it is not for me to say this to community. And there is a shift there. And that is one of respecting their governance system, their autonomy as nations. I'm just an academic, really. Cool beans. What else do you want to talk about? What are your hopes and desires? Maybe I'll put Sheena. I wish there were, who else is here? Sheena, what's your desire for midwifery care or for your community that you work with? I'm looking on, you're far north. Can I ask where you are right now, or
Yeah,
are you?
I'm in. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm in Anishaabeg, Fort McMurray. So our
Okay.
program, we have several communities that are under evacuation policy. One is Fort Chick and the other one is Jambier. And we travel to both. So we have a midwifery led team, and a nurse practitioner, aunties, birth workers. And we provide a lot of prenatal care in community and then support parents that are in town for evacuation. So I think my hopes and dreams, and I know Stephanie knows all my big hopes and dreams, is to really have, again, like you said, like it's really hard to just bring birth back to community in its fullest, like, having babies in community. But if we can bring it back as much as possible, and trying to limit the amount of appointments that parents have to come into town for, that's my dream. And then have a beautiful birth center for them to come and be surrounded by kokums and aunties and just loved on and not forgotten about. I think that's the biggest thing too, is, not forgetting about them after baby's 6 weeks old and they discharge from midwifery care, but continuing their journey through life as aunties, because, a lot of Indigenous midwives, they're just naturally aunties. And, we tend to care for their siblings and their extended family. So So really encompassing the entire family and the entire community, but that's my dream.
Love that.
Thanks.
Thanks.
We're slowly making our way.
Yeah. And this is like the support that, when people have this and you see the actual, like the utility of it, it's not just like some like, oh, we're going to hang out and, sing Kumbaya in our Birkenstocks. It's like, no, there's actually the blah, 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 blah. It's like, this is real. We can actually support this in some way. And I wonder why we're not. And who is we? Is it researchers engaged with community to move some of that research dollars, basically paying people? But if community says it works, why can we not actually, like the governments, since they're the money holders, the bank machine, why can they not fund a position so that service can be provided? How much more research? Like, we know this. Collaborative care models work. And what I heard from Sheena was a collaborative care model that is Indigenous based and specific to their communities. To me, this is everybody's winning. Why not?
Oh, Denise, go ahead.
Yeah, so Elliot lives in Edmonton. I live in Ermineskin, so I live in Muskogee. I live on Anishaabeg Reserve. So I do a lot of work with like iHealthy and Stephanie and but here in Muskogee we have the Mom Support and Healing Circle. And so before that we had the Elders Mentoring Program at our Wetaskiwin PCN. So Wetaskiwin's like a neighboring town where we all go to have babies.
Great bead
Um,
store.
Yeah, we own it. We own
No.
it. Yeah. Yay, everyone's
I'm just
gonna
looking at my
Yeah.
partner, road trip
They
coming
take
up.
over. I know.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, so we own the Wild West galleries and then the Bear Paw we
Bear
own. So
paw, 100%.
yeah.
They just
Anyways, I could go. Yeah. Um, but I had a really unique experience because when I went on maternity leave this past year, I thought, you know what? The heck with this. I'm gonna have my baby at home.
Mm,
I had this like big plan to have my baby at home, and midwife is like telling me, okay, there's only one thing that could maybe happen, and then we'll have to go to hospital. It happened. So I was really heartbroken. I didn't get to have my baby at home, but she was amazing. And the more that I and some of the birth workers here in Muskogee started to talk about home births, and one of those birth workers had a home birth here,
mm,
so that was really nice. Um, but it's still so foreign to even people on reserve. So even if I feel like there's two sides of the coin, right? Like you're not only fighting to like have self-determination through
mhm,
midwives and birthing your own babies, and it's your own people that are opposed to it.
mhm,
Like I've heard stories of people like, well, what if something happened? Like they don't trust the safety of our own birth workers, midwives to know what they're doing. And then the midwives,
mhm.
what we had trouble with was her getting like the clearance to actually birth
Hospital
the baby
privileges.
at the hospital.
Yeah.
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 So I still had well, it's funny, the doctor said he was going to deliver, but he wasn't even in the room. So she still
Yeah.
gave birth to my
So,
baby. I still caught the
uh,
baby.
yeah, the workarounds that sometimes care providers do is actually really beautiful. Like not being in the room, like, was it, we don't know the intention behind that. Like, were they negligent? They weren't there, or were they like, oh, I'm just gonna go for a coffee now, Peggy?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
like, and people do this. Like, there's all these little, I hear about it all the time, these beautiful things. And I do think having a baby in the hospital is not the worst thing.
No, it's
Like,
it's how you get cared for, right? It's how you're
how?
treated in the
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we have a really unique placement in Alberta,
Yeah.
because we're between two towns.
Yeah.
But I'm all for like birthing centers. Like it's like you build it and they will come. You know? that
Yes. So Denise, I don't know what your future plans are as a nurse, but it is evident to me
I'm
that
not a
you.
nurse.
Oh, you're not a nurse. What are you? Tell me more. How come I thought you were a nurse?
So I had this big hairy dream of becoming a doctor, and I'm meeting a lot of barriers educational wise with it, but
Okay.
I meet the requirements to become a nurse anyways. But right now I'm a researcher in community. I'm a
Okay.
science graduate.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
kind of my background. Yeah.
Nurses are awesome, you know.
Nurses are amazing. Yeah. But I'm not giving up. I'm just
Yeah.
in transition.
Right on. Good for you.
Just go to midwifery school, Denise.
I know. You know how many times people have told me that? Right? Like there's a whole bunch of us here that are wanting to like just advocate for a birthing center. So I think the people are getting there. It's just convincing our own people.
Yeah. Where's Key in comparison to you?
They're up north. I don't know.
It would be like in the middle
About
of
three
us.
and a half hours. Yeah, it's about 3.5 hours
Yeah.
from
Okay, so that's
Los
super
Angeles.
close. Why don't you just go visit for a day or two?
Yeah. I think is it Sturgeon Lake? They have
Yeah.
their own birthing center too.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
Key gonna make
Saskatchewan.
one too. And how far is Sturgeon Lake from you? It's a bit longer.
Yeah, it's a
About
bit.
4 hours.
Okay, that's nothing.
Wow.
Come on.
Yeah.
That's like listening to not even your playlist on Spotify. That's how I judge my time, and I get through my playlist.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great idea. Yeah. But I
Oh,
think, yeah, like as much as we think it's one-sided, sometimes it's not
yeah.
always, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, please
And
talk
we
to each other. Some of these like problems or barriers are actually just like, well, have you tried this though? Like they can be worked around, massaged, or you just like, well, not that way, but now we're going to go this way. And I'm just so inspired by community doing it. They're literally just doing it, not asking for permission. They're nation people. Exciting. I love this. So I see people
There,
sort of heading out though, but maybe we should kind of wrap up. I hope that, well, I'm going to come to Bear Paw if I'm in your community and spend more money on beads and sometimes fabric, and those kukum hankies, love those. And Sheena, I hope I can see you soon. I don't know when, but let's see each other.
very soon.
Awesome. I love this.
yeah. And before everybody goes, just wanted to remind everyone, if you're interested more in pregnancy research, or if you want to be involved in the research cluster, you can reach out to Michelle. Michelle will be waiting after this Zoom if you want to chat with her directly, or you can email the email that's in the chat right now to learn more about the cluster or get involved in the cluster. So
Yeah.
thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Thanks
Karen.
very
Thank you
much.
so much.
Love spending time with you all.
Thanks, Karen.
Welcome.